It's Sunday, the 26th of July, and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, the podcast where we cover matters of international, national, and local political importance and try and discuss them in a calm, reasonable, and measured way to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. Good evening, Ian, and good evening, listeners and viewers, and welcome to the show. So,
Yes.
what have we been planning for this evening?
Well, planning for us is a speculative process at the best of time, which usually involves you running around with remains of your hair on fire and me going, yeah, all right, Simon, that'll be fine. Yeah, I'll just turn up on Sunday and chat. But no, this has much more this week, and it all got a bit spicy in the chamber last week. Apart from Steve Pitt doing his EastEnders style, I ain't going to let nobody take over my Portsmouth pub. We will never be Southwest, edit, Southeast Hampshire. But apart from that, planning was the main event, wasn't it, Simon? That's what
Yes, it
got
was.
everybody vexed.
Yes. So, planning. It's often a contentious part of a local council's responsibilities, whether it's about building an extension to your home, whether it's about a new supermarket in your area, or even about a house of multiple occupancy, an HMO application on your street. The local council planning committees have to navigate the sometimes competing requirements of process versus passion. So how does it work? What powers does the council actually have? What say does your local councillor have? Is it consistent and fair? What happens when it goes wrong? And what difference will the upcoming government changes make to the look and feel of local planning committees? Well, aren't we lucky to be joined by an extra special guest, which is the chair of Portsmouth City Council's Planning Committee, which is Councillor Suzy Horton. Good evening, Suzy, and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Ian and Simon. Pleased to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, as we mentioned, and as I'm sure we don't need to tell you, with planning, it's a bit of a contentious issue, and there's usually lots of back and forth of what it does and what it doesn't do. So we have kind of prepared a bit of a bingo card, which we'll kind of tick off as we go, of what are the things that people normally say about planning, and we'll see how many of them turned out to be approved and how many are rejected. But let's without further ado, let's get cracking, shall we?
Dive straight in. So, Suzy, thank you ever so much for coming on. So, before we blame you for everything that happens in planning, because that's the default is that it's all Suzy's fault, would you like to start just by introducing yourself? Kind of, how long have you been involved in politics as a local councillor, and how long have you been blessed with the opportunity to be on the planning committee?
Yes, sure. I'm a Lib Dem councillor for Central South Sea Ward, and I was elected in 2015. And I think it's fair to say that my relationship with planning is a little bit of a sandwich, in the sense that the first 3 years we were in opposition and I was on the planning committee. Then when we went into administration, I took on a big portfolio of children, families and education, and I had a break from planning. And then, and during that time I was deputy leader, occasionally went on to planning as what's called a standing deputy, and then came back onto planning as the chair of planning last year and this year. So that's my relationship with planning as a Portsmouth City Councillor.
And at the same time as planning, the other side of that coin is currently deputy mayor.
Oh yeah, I forgot that. And currently I'm back onto a lot of scrutiny panels and chair of planning, and this year deputy Lord Mayor, and next year will be Lord Mayor.
Wow.
Fantastic. So not exactly a quiet calendar then. So what does the planning committee do, and who is it made up of?
Okay, so sometimes people say that the planning committee is quasi-judicial. I have been told that this is technically wrong, but the spirit of it helps define it. So unlike a lot of other things in the council, when you're on planning, you're not there 100% as your role as a city councillor. So it's bound by very clear national and local legislation, and that's the parameters within which you work. Primarily, you're there to either agree or disagree with a report that is presented around an individual planning application. So and that report is written, researched by professional planners who say, within these parameters, within the legislation, we recommend approval or refusal. And the planning committee need to look at that, investigate that, and decide whether they agree or disagree with that recommendation. Obviously, you have to be a politician to be on the planning committee because it's made up of councillors. But in that role, you shouldn't be wholly and purely political. You should be working together and looking and scrutinising the evidence that's come forward and other evidence that's presented to make that decision in all conscience within planning regulations.
Okay, so so if you need to be a councillor to be on the planning committee, how does someone get appointed to it? Do they get chosen?
So the planning committee is proportionate to the number of councillors in different political groups. Mm-hmm. So at the moment, the proportionality, I think, gives us 5 Lib Dems, 3 Reform, 1 Labour, 1 Conservative. There are also standing deputies, and basically what happens is at the AGM for full council at the beginning of the year after the elections are done, there is a meeting and the groups will work out between themselves who wants to be on what, and they will put their names forward to be on that committee with the standing deputies.
Okay,
perfect. So a team of 10. So apart from the councillors who are elected to the planning committee, who else gets to speak at the committee? Is it just you guys, or how does that process work?
So a meeting. So there are all sorts of timelines around how a planning determination is made. So if it comes to committee, it's either come to committee because it's a certain size of application, or it's been asked to come to committee from local councillors or particular interest. So at the committee, so there is already an agenda, and a week before, all of those reports are published. And then other people are entitled to speak at them. So basically, the people who can come and speak are residents who want to do what's called a deputation, and they want to come and either support or object it. The applicant can come and speak if they want to. The agent can come and speak if they want to. Other ward councillors can come and speak, and they're not bound by the same rules and regulations of the planning committee. They can kind of come and just argue their case, standing up for residents. The planning officers are at the meeting, and they will not only present the reports that they've written, but they are there to be the answers to the questions that the committee are asking. And the other person who can probably speak is whoever is the lawyer, the city solicitor, giving legal advice.
Right.
So lots of people can speak.
So it's a big old meeting. This feels like it doesn't sound like it runs as long as the gang of 42 that we have monthly, but it does sound like it's a fairly lengthy old affair, and
it can be a bit competitive with that one, to be honest, in recent years.
And I'm guessing an awful lot of documents that you then have to sift through and work through, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but if you gave me a planning document, I could read all the words and I'd probably understand most of them, but in their totality, I think most of us, would be looking for quite a lot of support to understand, well, what does that actually mean?
Absolutely. And I think, so anyone who sits on the planning committee has to go through planning training. But
Yeah.
you've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I've been doing this for many, many, many years. So a lot of the language, in fact, just before I came on here, I sort of brainstormed a lot of the acronyms, and
Yeah.
I've got them in front of me. So I've got HMO, SPD, LPA, SPA, LD, I could go on and on. So
Yeah.
those now actually mean something to me when I'm in the planning context, but you don't pick that up from going to one meeting when you've suddenly been elected as a councillor and you have to do this compulsory training on being on the planning committee. You're absolutely right. There needs to be a commitment there to really unpack what the decisions you're making, and to take that responsibility really, really seriously, and ask questions and do your research. You get better at it the more experienced you are in it, and you'll of course remember previous planning applications, and you'll remember that you used an argument or you were told a piece of information. But you're absolutely right that it is a really complex and specified area, really, which is really serious. I mean, it is a serious
Yeah.
responsibility.
Yeah, and I guess there is that piece, isn't there? Because once it's built, it's very difficult to unbuild it. And obviously, and again, I'm going to speculate a little bit here, Susie. I'm guessing the ones that get to planning committee are not the rubber stamped. I'd like to build a small extension on the back of my house. You only get to deal with the spicier and more contentious ones, where I guess the need for um, detailed knowledge is even more prevalent.
Yeah, you're right. Although I'd caveat that by saying, and I'm sure we'll get onto HMOs
Mm.
specifically at some point.
Oh
So
yeah.
those are the more contentious ones in terms of small applications. Interestingly, when it comes to big applications, which quite rightly are affecting possibly a big part of the city, or it could be that it's unusual, or it's linked to economic development or something like that. Often, interestingly, those have a lot more consensus. So I can give you an example. Like I've had one about the expansion of the skate park on the common. It goes to planning because the common is everyone's. So
Yeah.
therefore, a significant change to a building there is if the interests in the majority of people. Um, it's going to make a change that is open to public scrutiny in a way that sometimes small extensions aren't. But frequently, they get more consensus. We had one the other day with a court, paddleboard court.
Ah,
Um,
yes.
yeah, and so that was slightly more contentious, but on the whole, those ones are not always as lively as some of the smaller ones.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susie.
Interesting. So, if sorry, I've just lost my place. So, whether it's being the chair or just being on the committee at all, what would you say are the most frustrating parts of being of doing the role?
Actually, being in the chair, I haven't found so frustrating in terms of chairing that meeting.
Okay.
Whether it's because I used to be a primary school teacher, I'm not quite too sure. But
Yeah.
no, I also have made it really, really clear to the committee that we are there to do that job, and the way we do that job is we
Mhm.
stick to material planning considerations. So I've had conversations with people new to the committee, and I've just said to them, look, we might not always personally agree, but we're working within a system. We have a real responsibility to the reputation and the finances of the council, um, to do this properly. If you genuinely can't do that, then either come off the committee for that particular application, which you can do. I'm going to be doing that several times on Wednesday because I've predetermined. You have to walk into that meeting without predetermined view on
Mm.
how you're going to vote. And so, if you, for example, like I have, worked really closely with a couple of over many years with a couple of residents, then I can't seriously do that. So what I say to people is, if you're on the committee, I will come back to you and I will wait for you to come up with material planning reasons. And you can't just say you don't want it, or it's not nice, or the residents don't want it, or 100 people say they don't like it. And I will try and help you. But if I can't find any, then you've either got to withdraw your proposal or you've got to find them. And the officers will help us try and find the words.
Mhm.
So I think because I've done that, I don't know whether I actually don't mind chairing the committee. Sometimes it's really difficult because I have the casting vote,
Mm.
and I might want to vote one way or another, and then I know that's all eyes are going to be on me, as Ian said right at the beginning. It's like all my fault, but that's the responsibility of being the chair. So my frustrations really come in the bigger picture. One of the frustrating things about it is being on the end of a lot of criticism where people don't understand the system.
Mm.
So we have really, really limited grounds for making decisions, and they can't be on just a whim or a personal opinion or because we want to agree with residents. For example, the number of objections may well bring it to committee, but if there are 150 objections, that doesn't add any more weight than the content of them. So if the content of objection 1 highlights 4 points and those 4 points are repeated another 100 times, that makes no difference to it. That's just that. So that's a little bit frustrating when people say things like, well, I don't want that house down my road because the people who are likely to live in there are not people I want to associate with. It's not a material planning reason. So that is quite frustrating.
I might not like my future neighbours.
Yes. And you point out to people that, have you ever lived next to somebody who wasn't in, for example, an HMO who you didn't get on with? Yes. Well, that's exactly the same then. This is not what we're talking about. So other frustrations for me are when something is happening repeatedly, which you personally might not agree with, and I'm talking a principled thing here rather than just one application. So one of my personal feelings is when houses of multiple occupation are expanded to become larger, super HMOs, whatever we want to call them, frequently the ceilings and floors are ripped out. And I like Victorian houses and Edwardian houses. And when we sometimes see the plans around that, and we realise that behind that beautiful bay window, a foot back is a drop of 2 feet in order to bring the ceilings and floors down. Personally, I find that really upsetting, partly because I think, what happens if someone wants to sell their HMO or sui generis in the future? How many people buying that house is not easily reversible? So that's a personal opinion. I call it the rip them out and cram them in model. It's really difficult to get planning reasons to refuse it.
But taste isn't a reason you can object to. So just to help. So what does it mean by sui generis? What's that?
Okay. So now we're straying into HMO territory.
Oh, that's going to lead us straight
Or should we
into
save
our
that?
next. Let's lead that into our next question, then, shall we?
Right. Deftly, let's move on to that then.
I mean, I can actually say there's another thing that's really, really, just before we move on, there is another thing that's really, really frustrating, and this goes back to my entire time on planning, is when you can see that somebody has a plan for how they're going to get to a super HMO from where they're at, and they put in something like a cinema room or a an extra snug or something as a room, and you know full well as a planning committee that it's likely that in the future that application is going to come back once they've got planning permission to expand slightly, and then suddenly they're going to do it. We call that on the committee by stealth.
Oh,
and
right.
that
So,
is frustrating as
so
well.
they could apply to take like a 3-bedroom house into, or an existing like 4-room HMO to 7.
Yeah.
With a cinema room,
Yeah.
snug room, or laboratory, or whatever the hell. But then, kind of 6 months, 9 months down the line, they're going to come back for an application to take it to 8.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's frustrating, right? Because you're trying, one of the things that I said in my deputation last week when we were debating the stuff at the council is actually a lot of it's really clear cut. Whether you agree with it or not, it's very clear cut. But there is a window of what I call the human bit, where there's a window of opportunity open for debate, and the council officers may argue one way, and you can argue another way. And actually, it's not that there is room for judgment within that, and that's often around amenity or whatever. And so these are those spaces where actually you're trying to say, trying to argue that you think something may happen in the future, but you're trying to prove something that's going to happen in the future, and that's another challenge with planning.
Okay, thank you. Go on, Eddie, in HMOs. Come on.
We light the blue touch paper and retreat to a safe distance. So, houses of multiple occupation, HMOs, they seem to be about 90% of what comes to planning committee, and it seems to be what generates the most noise. So a very open question. What's all the fuss about?
Okay. Right, to start off with, I would do a little bit of explanation about what we're talking about here. So we have HMOs, houses in multiple occupation, and this is up to 6 people living in a shared house where they are not, no combination of them are a family unit, so 6 individuals. And interestingly, and this is where the whole debate around HMOs is really interesting in Portsmouth, because we actually have one of the strictest regimes in the country. So in a lot of other places, if you want to take your family home, which is called a C3, and you want to make it into an up to 6-bedroom HMO, a C4, you don't need planning permission at all. You just do it, and you do it under so another point worth making, sorry, I'm trying to keep this as clear as possible. Another point worth making is when these things come to planning, it's got very little to do with the building work, and it's got everything to do with the change of use. And that is something that we've introduced. Now, obviously, the two are related. You need to expand your house in order to add extra rooms in order to make it an HMO. But the majority of the building works is done under something called permitted development. So, and that means that most people, like if I want to expand my house, if I expand it in a certain way, I can do it under permitted development. It doesn't need to even be known to planning. But what we have in Portsmouth is basically a local bit of legislation, which is called an Article 4 direction, where what we say is you need planning permission anyway, plus if there are already 10% HMOs in your area, you can't have it. Now, an HMO is up to 6. What's become known as a super HMO, or in planning terms is called a sui generis, means that you are taking your 6-bedroom C4 HMO and you're making it into 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever you can do to your house. And the planning application will come through, and this is and they will state how many extra rooms. So what we often have in planning in Portsmouth is that the C3 to C4 in the areas which already have 10% already, they never come to planning again. In other words, the supplementary planning document has held its purpose really strongly. So I'm a councillor in Central Southsea. Some of the roads in my when it was introduced, by the way, in 2012, you couldn't apply it retrospectively. So
Right, yeah.
some of the roads in my ward have 40% HMOs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And you won't be surprised to know in Southsea that's directly linked to the university.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's just the way it is. So loads of residents, or residents occasionally, I should say to me, but we've got 40%. I'm saying, yeah, but you've not had one more since the SPD, the supplementary planning document, came in. However, and this is why it's a bit contentious, is that in those areas, developers have thought, okay, well, I can't buy a new house, but I can take my C4s that I've already got and I can expand them, because I can do loads and loads of stuff to my house under permitted development, and I'll just apply from a C4 to a SUI. So I've got 6 bedrooms now and I want 8 or I want 9. And they frequently come to planning.
Yeah.
But in planning terms, the current planning regulations, they feel that it doesn't make any material difference by adding 2 or 3 bedrooms.
Because you're not increasing the number of HMOs, but you're just increasing the number of rooms in one. Yeah. Cheeky. Other words might be available, but okay, that's the way that works. Sorry, Ian, go on.
So I guess we've got this quite strict set of rules, and as anyone who has ever ventured into Southsea and not used active travel, it would be fairly obvious that there is the other great doyen of council, parking. It seems to me that if there's currently 6 individual units in the building and there are 9, that is going to have an impact on parking, infrastructure, and it seems slightly, and I think this is why sometimes people struggle to grasp, even within the boundaries of the rules, how, if we've managed to create a local planning rule that seems to stop some of the flow, is there nothing we can do to make our super local planning rule even stronger?
Good point. I'm just going to step back once and I'll come back to you. So stepping back, a lot of areas have residence parking zones, which, as you say, we could do a whole own podcast.
We certainly could. Yes.
And having gone through having 2 parking zones taken away from my ward under a previous administration, and then having to fight to get them back, and gone through consultation on that, I know how charged conversations can be on parking, probably more than planning, actually. But when it comes to those parking zones, you can have up to 2 permits, basically. I mean, very occasionally you can have 3 if there's space in it, whether you've got 1 person living in a house or 11. Right. So when it comes to the planning committee, and similarly with bins and rubbish, there's often because obviously when they planning officers put together their report, they go to specialists in these areas, so they'll go to highways. If there is an RPZ, a residence parking zone, in there, then that is absolutely blown out of the water as a material planning reason, because that you've got an RPZ. Similarly with bins, if there's a forecourt and there's bins in it already, they say 1 person's extra rubbish is not going to make any difference. So a lot of the things, and coming back to your previous question about whether we feel frustrated, a lot of the things that we think are real and tangible and reasonable reasons that residents are worried are often blown out of the water on previous evidence. What also has happened is where the planning committee have previously refused planning permission for +1 room or +2 rooms, then we have lost an appeal. So the applicant will go, and there's some really famous cases of this, which the officers frequently refer back to, the Campbell Buildings one, and there's a couple of others. And they use that as evidence for their decision making, because it gets sent away. It's a planning inspector in Bristol who probably looks at a map of the city, looks at the report, and then says, yeah, no, +1's not going to make any difference. Now, my argument is it does make a material difference to people living there. And if you've got a road with 40% of HMOs and you look at it in the whole, in the round, you're actually potentially adding 8 houses if everybody does that. So we have something called, we know we have a local plan. The next local plan has built into it exactly what you were referring to, which is this is a loophole we want to close out and stop. And therefore, in that next local plan, which should come live in the autumn, we're hoping, if it stands up as robustly as the previous supplementary planning document, that in actual fact, these +1s, +2s in an area that's already got 10%, I might add, not just anywhere, will get knocked out. And in the meantime, in the short term, when you're on the planning committee, and I have used this about 4 times now, as you get nearer to your next local plan, you can apply increasing weight to it.
Right.
So we have a couple of appeals in at the moment where we have used that as reason for refusal. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I was trying
and to be honest, Suzy, we're going to dwell on this just for just one little bit longer, because I think, and this is where I take the next part of the question, which is, HMOs do seem to generate a lot of noise, particularly on social media. Are they, or have they become a little bit of a political football locally? Local councillors striding forward and perhaps making promises they can't keep about holding back the tide?
I think they have become politicised, and I think there's definitely different grades of it. I mean, I always think, why are they? We're elected as councillors, and we're elected to stand up for our residents. That's our first job, to do that.
Yeah.
So the reason that councillors often call these in to committee to be debated in principle is that they're standing up for their residents. So I think that we have to step back and say, do you know what? Whilst at the committee we can say to people, actually, we haven't got any material planning reasons to say no to this. We actually support you and we're on your side. And this will link into some of the changes that I'm going to talk about a bit later on. So my view is with residents is what are they saying to me and why are they so emotional? And some of those things are really, really valid reasons. So if I go back to the roads in my ward, someone didn't move out in time, basically, and they're now living in a road where they feel like they're living with loads of students and they don't want an extra big house next to them and they don't want the rubbish and the noise and all those kind of things. I think that's a reasonable position to be in, and I will argue that they do make a material difference. Sometimes the narrative has been conflated with things that just are not true, like it's going to be filled with loads of immigrants, or it will be filled with loads of druggies. I mean, all HMOs are filled with awful people who are going to be drunk and noisy. And that just, quite frankly, is just not true. And there are many non-HMO houses that are filled with people whose behaviours are not what you would want. And so there are levels of this, and I think that's why we need to come back at planning is taking every single application on its own, in its own context. Look at how many other HMOs there are. Look at the fears that people have, and in actual fact, stop just blatantly politicizing it when it's not based on true things. So I think it's not one or other. I think it's a complex kind of thing in the middle, which is why, coming back to my earlier point, is some like on Wednesday I will come out of the chair and I will do 2 deputations where I will speak more freely, and I will still stick to planning, material planning reasons, but I will
Yeah.
be able to explain more emotionally why I'm on the side of my residents. That's why I'm coming out of the chair, because I've been involved with them before. So it it's it is interesting, and I think what's happened is there's been some other things that have been thrown into the mix, like for example HMO databases. And again, these things, once you actually go back and you look at the reality, they're always a little bit complex. So by law, you have to have an HMO database for licensing. So if you license a house, you have to be on a separate database. And Portsmouth has increased its licensing for any shared house now needs to have a license. And we made this. These are called additional licenses. So that database is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But licensing isn't planning.
No.
So previously there was a planning database, which was compiled by planning officers who thought, do you know what, if we've got to work out this 10% rule, we're going to have to know what other HMOs there are on the road. Now, thankfully, those 2 things have been brought together. But all of these things are kind of, it's a little bit of a complex matrix, I think, with this, why the hype and the confusion is sometimes the thing that leads it rather than the pragmatism. Because I lived in an HMO when I was a teacher. I wasn't partying all night. I was playing with sticky back plastic, and just along with my friends. And the last point I will make on a positive is because Portsmouth has been so strict about space standards, about licensing, the rest of it, we've got really increasingly high quality HMOs, shared houses, which we need for our nurses, our teachers, or people just leaving home who can't afford to buy their own or even rent on their own. So
Right. No, thank you for covering HMO. So we've worked out how it works now. Simon, do you want to lead us into the changes?
Yes. So that's obviously talking about the current state, and we talked a bit about not all applications coming to the committee, and some do, some don't, some are within permitted development, as you were saying. But there are changes coming into place. Is it October that they're coming into place?
31st of October, I think they start.
So what's changing, and what difference is that going to make?
Yeah, now I'm going to get on my hobby horse.
Okay,
I think this is really awful. So if you think of everything that I've just covered and about how we call on almost like a professionalism of people on the planning committee to balance that role about primarily needing to serve their residents, but also to be being respectful of the legislation. And what is positive about that is public scrutiny. It's like I was saying, give an example, like you call something to committee and you think actually maybe it's not going to get passed, but at least you've demonstrated to your residents there's been robust discussion and an analysis of all the information. And so they're called in by councillors. There's also things we've got like blanket call-ins, which are not done in the rest of the country. For example, an HMO going to a sui generis, that's a blanket call-in, and we have to say, do we think it needs planning permission, vote, and then the debate follows. So that is changing. So the government have done a planning planning review. It's like a planning reform, and that legislation has gone through. There was consultation period, and various people kind of responded. I responded, and Councillor Hugh Mason, who's planning policy on the cabinet, and essentially what they're saying is, in order to speed up decision making, because if things go to committee, of course it does delay it slightly. We are going to create 2 schedules of planning applications. One of them, Schedule 1, is householder applications, minor commercial, residential. 100% HMOs will be in that. And they can never go to planning. They will still be advertised. People will still be able to object. So residents will be able to object. And I'm sure that councillors will encourage people to put in either their support or their objections. But they can never come to planning. They are 100% decided by delegated officer decision making. And I want to say at this point, actually, we have some really, really good planning officers at Portsmouth City Council. So this is not an anti-them. This is just about, for me, is a real challenge to democracy. And then other things are in Schedule 2. So these are all other applications. And I've got the wording, which I'm going to read out because I haven't learned it off by heart yet. So overriding presumption will be of determination by officers, but they may be referred to a planning committee if the nominated officer plus the nominated member of the planning committee agree. So here's some examples of those. So listed buildings, they are likely to go to planning committee just on that Schedule 2. Major applications are likely to go to planning committee, and by major we're talking like big schemes of house building or like a massive thing like, I don't know, possibly the skate park or something like that, which is a big one. Things that have often come to planning which have also been contentious, which haven't been HMOs, are things like trees. I mean, people love a tree, and we've had big kind of discussions around trees that they will no longer come to planning committee. Big advertising boards won't come to planning committee. And this is really, really, for me, there's another one which is really interesting, which is retrospective planning. And we have a lot of things where it's come to our notice that things need planning permission. For example, an HMO that's been being used for 10 years and wasn't done. None of that will come to planning. If you're a councillor and you need planning permission and you work for the council, they will. So they're going to keep that. But you've probably heard what I said then. Essentially, it will come down to 2 people making these decisions. One of them will be me.
Oh,
Or the chair of planning. So all of these incredibly creative accusations that we often get about brown envelopes, and taking a bung and all the rest of it. In actual fact, whilst that never has happened to me at all in any way, shape, or form, actually there's scope, isn't there, for that happening more if the only elected member who's making all these decisions is the chair of planning or a nominated one.
And is that decision? Sorry, Suzy, is that decision between, say, for example, yourself and the relevant officer? Is that still made in an open meeting, or is that made behind closed doors?
No.
Oh.
So I think how it will work, and I need to have some. I'm actually going on a national training course because I just feel this weight of responsibility from a couple of months' time is just enormous. So I think what they're proposing in Portsmouth is to have like a meeting every 2 weeks, which I'm going to call it like a referral meeting, and we will look at the planning applications. And of course, I won't see any HMO ones. So it's not like HMOs don't go to planning. Elected members don't get to see all of that Schedule 1 stuff. It will absolutely just be happening. So we'll record our decisions and the outcome and the reasons why, and that will be material planning reasons, because most of the NPPF, which is the National Planning Policy Framework, won't change. And then there's going to be something called a guidance document, which is going to be called an assessment of significance. And so in our write up to our meeting, we will make reference to that. So in other words, it's not just going to, oh, let's meet up, let's make this up as we go along. There will be a new internal guidance. I feel really strongly that this removes the transparency, it removes the debate, it removes the public scrutiny, and quite rightly, a lot of people don't have a lot of respect for politicians and local government anyway. The council is responsible for anything that's not good. But actually, the accusation of being behind closed doors is absolutely going to be correct.
Yeah, and I think, Susie, this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because as you explained to us, often material planning objections are all that you've got. And, I guess the people who are going to know those best are the planning officers. So when they assess a planning application, in the vast majority of cases, they know if it's going to pass or fail, even the ones that come to you for scrutiny. So sometimes, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, that the planning committee piece becomes slightly performative.
Yeah.
In of, well, 150 people have objected, but they've objected to it for the wrong reasons, so it's going to go through anyway. But I think it sounds to me like, whilst people might not have liked the outcome, at least they got to watch the debate.
Absolutely that.
Whereas now it sounds like, there's somebody with a big rubber stamp doing the, approve, reject, all behind closed doors. As you say, that yeah, well, obviously, if we can't book you next summer because you're off for 6 weeks in the Caribbean on your super yacht, then we might ask some questions ourselves. But in the vast majority of cases, it is ludicrous. But often ludicrous and conspiracy inhabits the space where there's no transparency.
So I like to think I have a reputation of being quite fair-minded. So I step back and think, like, what is this about? I think one of the things the government wanted to do was to speed things up. But I think this is another example of one size fits all, but it doesn't fit all. So if you look at the consultation and you look at some of the arguments behind it, it's about mandatory housing targets. That's one of them. Speeding things up. But then it goes into the area of what they call grey belt and brownfield. In Portsmouth, we've got very few other options to do big house building. And so I think we've been swept up with a really blunt instrument here. And it probably will benefit pushing out house building in grey belts or brownfield, whatever. But in actual fact, the backwash in Portsmouth is just overwhelmingly going to not create a massive amount of house building. It will accelerate some HMO expansions probably, and possibly more HMOs rolling out up towards the north of the city where they're not already 10%. But I think the fallout from that is really serious in terms of democratic processes. And I think that's a shame.
What are people going to write their leaflets or their Facebook posts about? I just feel like there's an entire engagement industry that's going to die on its knees because it won't be able to kind of rile, or it will be able to rile people up, but there'll be nothing for them to do with their distrust or their anger or their concerns, because they can't even have their say, even if their objections aren't material and don't result in a rejection. They can't even have their say. They can't even feel that their voice has been heard.
And that counts. And that was where I come back to the thing about being a councillor. Whilst you're not fully councillor hat while you're on the committee,
Yeah.
you can use those two hats to say to someone, look, I have a lot of empathy what you're doing. I can't promise you that it will get rejected because it probably won't for these reasons, but I'll stand up for you. Either by staying on the committee and arguing something or by coming off it. And I just think it's very undemocratic.
I guess one area, and it's quite a specific question, Susie, so forgive me if you haven't got the answer, is obviously we talk a lot about houses of multiple application. Just in the north of the city, we've seen a couple of high profile kind of applications recently, which is around turning commercial properties into, I don't know what the term is for a super gigongous house of multiple applications. I think that might be the technical term. There's been a lot of talk about saving high streets and community spaces. We're not a high street anymore if half of the commercial units have been turned into super duper HMOs. Are those gonna, is that something that it feels like the planning committee should be involved in stuff like that? Are you at the moment, or and will you be in the future?
So we are at the moment, and they are very interesting ones because there is an argument to say that whilst high streets aren't going to revert back to, because of shopping, etc., they're not going to go back. In actual fact, when you do bring housing into high streets, that is the start of regeneration. And you might argue that in Palmerston Road, there's the start of that with all those flats coming on board. That when you live in a flat, you need to go and eat and buy things, etc. So I always find those applications really interesting. We've had a few in the north of the city where actually the committee have said no, there needs to remain some kind of commercial frontage, but but you don't necessarily have to have the whole of the ground floor. So that's been an interesting debate. But I don't think. I mean, there'll be test cases, won't there? But I don't think I think they'll be Schedule 1, Ian. So I don't think I'll even get to hear about them. So I'm guessing that when planning applications come in, I mean, this is all new and we have no idea how it'll work out. But I'm wondering whether the database will still be the same in terms of applications, and city councillors, if they want to be looking on what's going on in their ward, would be letting residents know without being able to do anything more than that.
Yeah, because I think Simon made a really. I know Simon was saying about Facebook posts and people getting vexed, or often it's at the moment you have that transparency. You see these things coming, and let's be honest, you have a social media presence. You people know who you are, and obviously if that message reaches a lot of people through your social media and they choose to amplify that, then a larger group of your residents are aware of exactly what's going on, whether they like it or not. But I guess in this new world, a file lands on a planning officer's desk who reviews it, publishes it on a website somewhere, I'm sure. But, it's the great joke of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is, well, why didn't you object? The planning permission's been in the drawer of a 13 stories below ground for the last 8 years, and you never came to ask to look at it.
I think it was logged at Alpha Centauri for the last 50,000 years or something.
Where it was.
But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the examples that you're thinking of, Ian. With I know there's a couple upcoming, so we won't mention those. But
away from the specifics, yes.
So kind of previous ones, there have been a couple that the conversion of the NatWest in the High Street. And then right at the top of the high street, both kind of commercial units where actually it's kind of almost actually kind of reverting to the sense of mixed developments, which we seem to have a lot of historically. But actually, when you look at kind of places like Southsea or Elm Grove, they would have historically been residential, where the ground floor was converted into a shop and the upstairs was residential for for the occupants, and then eventually, obviously, for someone else. The NatWest one, wasn't that the one where? Sorry, the one at NatWest, wasn't that the one where there was actually quite some, I don't know how to say it, some loud objections and accusations from the gallery, which was
Yes.
not the sort of thing that as contentious and as passionate as planning consent usually seems to be. And for my sins, I've also watched quite a few of the planning meetings. So just to kind of
you're so quirky, Simon.
I know. I can't. I just, who needs to go out of an evening when you can just watch the Portsmouth City Council's Democratic Services YouTube channel? There's so much to see. Who needs Netflix? So when you kind of look at things like that, is there a danger that the people are going to kind of be whipped up into or could that be kind of a worse situation, because then there's even less that they're going to be able to do with that. There isn't going to be a public actually there's not going to be a public meeting for them to go to and shout at, is there?
And I don't know, because I mean, without going into specific examples, it's like, how mobilized would groups of people be without councillors? These are questions generally. It's not even loaded from my point of view. Is if the platform that you can get as a councillor, by writing a street letter, telling people about the meeting, doing a deputation at the meeting, if that platform is taken away, will it diffuse it? Do you know what I mean? I mean, I don't know. Question mark. It might be that none of this stuff ever comes to light. So in actual fact, there's no protest because no one knows about it. And it just, you kind of ground down by the, undemocratic kind of opportunities.
It's a strange way to do devolution, isn't it? To not give. Sorry, that's probably
stop it. So I guess just in the interest of time, there, Suzy, has this been approved? This change to the whole planning process, is this now approved, signed off, sealed, stamped?
Yeah,
in a darkened room, is there any hope of reversing the tide?
No, I don't even.
Is this just going to be this is the new reality?
Yes, I think it went through. I think it was published in December, and then then it went through Parliament. I think in April, I want to say, or May. I don't quote me on that one, but what is interesting is that on April the 1st, and then this didn't get much coverage at all. The appeal system changed. So it was like a first step towards what was coming, but there wasn't any kind of loud announcement or anything. And the reason it changed, so if officers recommend approval for something and the planning committee decide, and they have a debate and they come up with material planning reasons why they don't want to do it, up until that date, the officers were obliged to compile a supportive file of the planning committee's decision. So they'd send their original report, and they would they would help the planning committee, because as we quite rightly said earlier on, we're not all experts. They'd help them present their objections in the best planning speak possible. From April the 1st, that all changed, so that the only evidence that officers have to submit to the planning inspector is the minutes of the meeting. So, and sometimes, I don't know whether Simon knows because he's heard some of these meetings. I imagine that the minutes, no disrespect to anybody who's writing the minutes, may not be quite so neatly packaged as they would have done if an officer had been compiling a supportive statement for that. And that started in April. So it'll be really interesting to see how many appeals are. It's difficult to prove it, but it will be interesting to see what happens with appeals in the absence of that extra supportive information.
So, with time fast running out, Suzy, any few final words for us on planning? You've done a fantastic job covering what is a very complex set of issues, and obviously, if you don't have the zeal of Simon to watch these meetings in the evening, it's been fantastic. So, final word for yourself.
It's it's just I would just say to people, I find it frustrating sometimes that we're in a bit of a post-truth world, that actually just try and do some research and try and see what the complexity of the whole decision-making process.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to summarise. And if you can't be bothered to do the hard work yourself, you can always listen to a wise, witty, and informative local political podcast. And
Good
today
on,
you've
Vinny.
been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guest this evening has been Councillor Suzy Horton, the chair of Portsmouth City Council Planning Committee. Thank you, Suzy.
Yeah.
I've been Simon Sainsbury. We didn't quickly, very, very briefly, the Mythbusters. Are there any that were there any that turned out to be true of what was there?
I don't think so. Councillors have a veto, no. Committee members can reject if they don't like, no. Planning committees are controlled by political, no. Applications receiving over a certain number of negative comments get rejected, no. Councillors get paid to vote in a certain way, no. No brown envelopes. Planning decisions are made behind closed doors. They will be. No means no. Once something, it's a yes or no. Reasons are not required when rejecting. They are needed. And council prioritise applications for people not from Portsmouth. No. So only one.
Which will be soon.
Future one. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you very much for busting those myths. I've been Simon Sainsbury, and we're going to take a break now for the summer. We'll be back at the beginning of September. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much.
Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.